So today we'll be discussing about mostly historiography, debates, etc. All these aspects. And as all of you know, in modern India, these are very important. Try to remember these contemporary opinions. Your answers can be improved with the help of them. Okay. कभी भी आंसर लिखोगे, फ्रेमवर्क को अच्छा करना है, इंट्रोडक्शंस को इम्प्रूव करना है, स्ट्रक्चर्स को बेटर करना है, सब हेडिंग्स बनाना है, all those things can be done with the help of these various opinions. So keywords we have to remember. Okay, so initially there is some opinion on the British conquest of India. These are potential questions also. These are potential questions. In 10 marker you always get few comments. So in 10 marker, कोई भी एक question. Let's see the first one. Peace Spear. Okay, so he says that it was in this way that the British proved to be residuary legates of the unclaimed estate of Hindustan. So with this statement, unclaimed, what is the meaning of unclaimed? He is calling Hindustan as unclaimed estate. What is the meaning of that? So this should start with the beginning of the 18th century. In the initially what happened? We see the death of Aurangzeb, which led to the transformation of Indian polity, which became more decentralized. So decentralization of the power structure happened. After this, if we see, there were certain defining moments, like the moment of 1739. This gave a death blow to the Mughal Empire. All the power and prestige was gone. Similarly, 1761, Battle of Panipat. This Battle of Panipat decided who will not rule India rather than who will rule India. This happened. This can be easily seen. Similarly, the Anglo-French rivalry, 1760, the Battle of Vandivash, which also ousted French. Okay, so this is what the opinion is. Rather than being on a very sound footing, British were able to enjoy the outcome of the battles in which they were not involved. Okay, and this could be seen with respect to both Mughals as well as the Marathas. And then comes the final blow in 1764. Okay, which led to the complete domination of Bengal, and it opened the vistas of opportunity in northern India. So this is the opinion which comes from here. No, अभी तो वहीं तो आने हैं अभी आगे. This is the opinion of Peace Spear. So far मैंने उसको critically analyze भी नहीं किया है. So they said unclaimed estate of the Hindustan. So they say British proved to be residuary legatees. Residuary मतलब बस बचे हुए थे, कुछ बचा नहीं था. Eventually they were the only one who could rule. Nobody was left to rule India. तो किसी को तो आना पड़ेगा. This historiography is mostly from the point of view of British or the colonial historiography. Even though we can explain their perspective कि हाँ ये ऐसे ऐसे हो गया, but they were not just the residuary legatees, but at the same time they were also the confrontary. They were fighting actively with French. Okay, they were the one who participated in Battle of Plassey, even though through treachery means they were able to get the victory. In 1764, again they were on the warring side, and thereafter they were able to create an empire. Alright, it was not so that they were left behind. Even after this Battle of Buxar, they had to defeat Marathas, Mysore, Punjab. So in the first half of the statement, okay, good evening all the online students. In the first half of the statement, you have to discuss the opinion of the Peace Spear. So all those events have to be connected. In the second half, you have to come up with a critical examination in which you will say it was not just a residuary legatee, somebody who was left behind. कि सारे लोग मर गए, they were the only one left behind. अब किसी को तो responsibility लेनी पड़ेगी. This was not something which was done just for the sake of responsibility. They wanted to create an empire in India. This is the debate which we will discuss in detail. ठीक है ना, इसको ठीक से करेंगे. Here it's more about the political events. जब somebody says ना unclaimed estate of Hindustan, so unclaimed estate का मतलब क्या है? Somebody जिसका कोई ऑनर नहीं है, तो ओनर नहीं मिल रहा है, तो ठीक है हमने ले लिया, ठीक है. दिस इज व्हाट दे आर सेइंग कि नोबडी इज एन ओनर इन इंडिया, बट दैट इज नॉट सो. देयर वाज सम इंपॉर्टेंट dynasties which we can see in Marathas, Mysore as well as Punjab, and they were conquered one after the other by the British through their various imperialistic policies. So this opinion is mostly tilting towards one aspect of British rule, that yes, they were helped by the decline of Mughals and that of the Marathas, but at the same time they also ventured out. It was not so that they were the last man standing, that's why they were able to create an empire of India. They were actively participating in this contest, initially with the French and then later with the various categories of states of 18th century. It can be a successor state like we see in the case of Bengal and Awadh as well as Hyderabad, or it could be a rebel state like Marathas. It could be even the independent states that we can see even in the Punjab. All right, so all these were participating in this struggle. So you have to remember this. भाई narrative तो आप कैसा भी बना लो. It's very easy to build narratives, but their narratives are always going to be on the side of the British. They are never going to accept what they have done in India. Okay, they are the one who are responsible for countless number of famines in India. They are the one who are responsible for cruel policies. Okay, the administration that they established, initially dual administration, that was a complete failure. So they themselves had encountered so many challenges. They were the one who failed from 1765 till 1793 in creating any kind of good revenue settlement or land revenue settlements. Okay, their policies were also fluctuating from one time to another, sometimes Orientalism, then utilitarian, then again conservatism. These are the various policies which we see under the British. So ये चीज वो नहीं accept करेंगे. What they'll say कि it has happened unconsciously. So if we see the second opinion, it starts with John Seeley. This opinion is the most you can say popular one, which says British conquest of India was made blindly, unintentionally and accidentally and in a fit of absent mindedness. कि भाई हम तो ऐसे ही बस पहुंचे वहां पे, उन्होंने कहा चलो रूल कर लो. So we also shook hands with them कि चलो ठीक है स्टार्ट कर लेते हैं. Alright, this is something which we, ये पूरा अगर आपका डिबेट उसी के ऊपर है तो उसको बाद में डिस्कस करते हैं कि why they are saying so. Let us see John Bright. Okay, so John Bright. So this is the comment which you need to remember. कहीं भी conclusion में, कहीं भी introduction में, you can use this statement. We conquered India by breaking all the 10 commandments. Okay, we conquered India by breaking all the 10 commandments. Why is this coming from John Bright? How can we explain this statement? His opinion is more on the side of कि we have played dirty. Okay, we have कुछ protocol follow नहीं किया. We have not been you can say sane kind of conquerors. Our policies kept on shifting. Okay, we did not ask people for governance. Whatever we wanted, we'd start doing that. So this opinion is now on the other side of the spectrum. If we see the first one, he is saying कि we were someone who got an inheritance. कि हमें बस हम वहाँ खड़े हुए थे. We were in India. French lost, Marathas lost, Mughals were gone, so we were left behind. That is one opinion. This is the second opinion, which says we have broke all the 10 commandments. So we have to see the chain of events which can justify this opinion. So what are those opinions? First focus on the political part. So we start with the Carnatic War, like the various initiatives taken by them in the Second Carnatic War. Okay, become part of the political alliance. Siege of Arcot. Now, Siege of Arcot is something which was not required from the British side, but they did so because they wanted to participate in the political game. Till that time, it was Dupleix who was more successful. Dupleix, he defeated the Nawab of Carnatic in the first Carnatic War. In the second Carnatic War also till 1751, he was on the winning side. Starting from 1752 when the siege of Arcot is going to be started. Okay, so this is how we see 10 commandments are broken. Alright, so starting from this Carnatic War, then you see the Battle of Plassey. Was it a battle? No, this was a treachery. Okay, so they were able to shake hands with Mir Jafar and they were able to get Bengal. Alright, similarly, whichever incident can be linked to lack of moral dealing, that can be added in this. There are so many examples of this one. Like we see the conquering of Sindh. Okay? Charles Napier, we have no right, but we still do so. What a humane piece of rascality it will be. Right? So this comes from him. Similarly, you see the case of Punjab also. It was conquered by Dalhousie. What was the role of Dalhousie? He says every native state which could not be left out because of one reason or the other should be annexed. Zyada time nahi dena unko. Doctrine of lapse. What was this? All these policies, what they wanted a empire. And for that, whatever opportunity they got, they took it. It's not that they were unaware of the situation. Like you see the Third Anglo-Mysore War. Third Anglo-Mysore War was fought between Lord Cornwallis and Tipu Sultan. So Tipu Sultan, he had not raised the banner of revolt against the British. He had started again Travancore, which was one of the protectorate, and that was over the issue of certain territory which was claimed by both. But it led to the beginning of the war in which Tipu Sultan was defeated. This was not because of that event. This was because they had this grudge against Tipu Sultan, that we want to crush him, and whenever we'll get the opportunity, we'll take it. Similarly can be seen with the Marathas. They meddled. What was this second Anglo-Maratha war all about? This was about the meddling in the affairs of the Marathas. Maratha Confederacy signed the subsidiary alliance treaty with the Peshwa, and then eventually the war followed. Okay, so each and every policy which they have used, eventually you have to say it. Okay, starting from Bengal, where the resources were now at their disposal. So India paid for its own occupation. है ना, खुद को हमारे ही पैसे के through they were able to rule us. No, whatever they did, it was eventually for their own benefit. So this is about the other ugly side of the British, how the British Raj was created. Okay, be it the role of the Robert Clive, be it the role of the other governor generals, and most importantly Lord Wellesley, who was mostly fighting the wars. The same can be said about the Lord Hastings, which will come of 1813 onwards. The similar tendency can be seen during the time of the most important one, Dalhousie, from 48 till 56. So eventually these grievances were responsible for the revolt of 1857. Okay, the manner in which they had treated the sepoys, like they were put in front of the cannon fodder and blasted off. Villages were burned. Okay, if we see at the time of the plague in Pune, 1896-97, there was a plague event. So the villages were burned off. This is how a state should take decisions. So that is what this 10 commandments is all about. That the manner in which they were able to bring control over India, this could not be justified, or this could not be justified as a policy of good governance or a policy of even benevolence. Okay, all of this was linked to a design. The only important thing was converting India into a colony was a priority, because the resources of India were to be used for the development of Britain. Okay, so neither our resources were used for our own development. All the policies, they were imposed on us just because some court of director or the board of control wanted to have that. So, okay, if we see, even in their policies, there were a lot of racism from the start. You could not enter into a job जहाँ 500 पाउंड से ज़्यादा आपकी सैलरी है, you could not be, as per the Charter Act of 1793. Similarly, we see the civil service exam of India was not held in India, है ना. अभी हो जाए तो ज़्यादा अच्छा है. एटलीस्ट एक ट्रिप मिलेगी आप लोगों को. एनीवे, सो इट वाज नॉट इन इंडिया. तो कितना अच्छा है, मतलब फैमिली को आप जबरदस्ती बोलते ना कि मुझे दिल्ली जाना पड़ना, राजेंद्र नगर जाना, कहते मुझे लंदन जाना है. सो दोज वर द प्रॉब्लम्स. आपकी कंट्री का एग्जाम आपके यहाँ नहीं हो रहा है, इट वाज हैपनिंग इन लंदन और इट वाज हैपनिंग इन इंग्लैंड. सो you can see easily the design. So this is what John Bright is all about. Okay, this comment is very powerful. So after 1858 it was eventually, the occupation was limited. After Queen's proclamation, Lord Canning decided Allahabad mein ab now we are not going to conquer any more territory. Okay, but even the policies through which India was governed, they were not changed. हाँ, दैट देखो, अगर 10 मार्कर में आएगा तो अभी हमने जितना पॉइंट डिस्कस कर लिया वो भी नहीं लिख पाओगे. ठीक है, इट्स ऑल अबाउट, द क्वेश्चन इज मोर अबाउट, सी द स्टेटमेंट इज वी कॉन्कर्ड इंडिया. सो द पार्ट इज अबाउट कॉन्करिंग इंडिया बाय ब्रेकिंग ऑल द 10 कमांडमेंट्स. ओके, सो दैट्स समथिंग व्हिच यू नीड टू, इवन दो war was a way of life in those times, war was there, whenever there were political contenders, war were there. But even in this war, the manner in which British fought, they still broke these commandments. Can be seen from Plassey, can be seen from the way they captured Sindh, the way Dalhousie was doing the policy of doctrine of lapse. Okay, so those were the breaking of the commandments, the meddling in the affairs in the Carnatic, Marathas, okay, or even the policy of subsidiary alliance. It was a very unfair treaty which was imposed on the native states, so that they cannot never create an alliance and raise the banner of revolt against the British. So all these instruments which were used by the British for capturing India, they were unholy. Okay. Yes. लिखने को आप कुछ भी लिख लो, but the only thing is there you can talk about the force of the westernization. The forces of westernization were imposed in the education sphere, even in the department of social reforms. What they were doing the reforms, but उसका कुछ outcome नहीं आता था. So this is just like breaking the 10 commandments. कहीं भी introduction में, conclusion में आप use कर सकते हैं इसको. This is a very important statement. Make it part of your answer writing habits. ठीक है, कभी भी कोई क्वेश्चन आता है उसको यूज कर सकते हो ऑन एनी स्पेसिफिक. जैसे कि क्वेश्चन प्लासी पे आता है, इंट्रोडक्शन में लिखो, ओके, द बैटल ऑफ प्लासी वाज वॉन बाय द ब्रिटिश बाय ब्रेकिंग ऑल द 10 कमांडमेंट्स. कहीं भी फिट कर सकते हो. ठीक है, द पॉलिसी ऑफ द लॉर्ड डलहौजी और द नॉर्थ वेस्ट फ्रंटियर पॉलिसी ऑफ लॉर्ड डलहौजी वाज बेस्ड ऑन ब्रेकिंग द 10 कमांडमेंट्स. ठीक है, इन द फॉरेन रिलेशंस. यूज करना सीखो कीवर्ड्स को, स्टेटमेंट्स को, पर्सपेक्टिव्स को, बिकॉज आउट देखो ये रेशियो ध्यान रखना, 20% ऑफ द क्वेश्चंस विल रिक्वायर एक्टिव थिंकिंग, एटलीस्ट 20% ऑफ द क्वेश्चंस. क्या सोचना पड़ता ऑन द गो, क्या लिखें इसके अंदर, अदरवाइज क्या करोगे, सोचना पड़ेगा ना ऐसे क्वेश्चंस में. अगर ऐसा कोई स्टेटमेंट आ जाएगा तो इसका रेडीमेड आंसर तो होगा नहीं आप लोगों के पास में. एंड सिमिलरली whenever you're writing a very easy answers, तो वहाँ पे आपके पास कीवर्ड्स नहीं होते हैं. यानी वो आपको घसीटा रहता है, तो जमींदार 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 लगे हो तो भी जमींदार ही रह गए. यस, नहीं, these are the commandments which are part of the religion. हाँ हाँ, तो बाइबल से रिलेटेड है कि हम जितना भी खराब काम कर सकते थे वो कर लिया हमने. हाँ, इट जस्ट मीन्स कि यहाँ पे हमें लिटरली रिलीजन उस टाइम पे नहीं जाना, हमें बस ये देखना है देयर वाज नो मोरालिटी, नो प्रिंसिपल, है ना. देयर आर पीपल हु फॉलो सम प्रिंसिपल्स इन डूइंग समथिंग, स्क्रूपलस जिसको बोलते हैं, कम से कम प्रिंसिपल्ड आदमी है, और द प्रिंसिपल्ड नेशन. सो नथिंग ऑफ प्रिंसिपल कुड बी सीन इन देयर अप्रोच. यस,
as a founder of modern India.
Yes.
अगर उसके साथ critically examine the keyword लगे, तो can we use it as बात के हाँ modern India का founder है, लेकिन 10 commandments break करके ही ये चीज हुई है.
हाँ, यूज करो. जीएस में मत लिखो जबरदस्ती, मतलब वहां शो ऑफ नहीं करना है. हाँ तो देखो, जो आपका क्वेश्चन है ना, दो पर्सपेक्टिव हमेशा ध्यान रखो ब्रिटिश के. ब्रिटिश ने जो भी किया है इट वाज फॉर देयर ओन सेक. मॉडर्नाइज किया इंडियन इकोनॉमी को, इन्होंने करने की कोशिश की. लाइक रेलवे वाज ब्रॉट इन, बट द प्राइसेस ऑफ द रेलवे फॉर इंटरनल मूवमेंट वाज हायर देन डायरेक्ट मूवमेंट विद द पोर्ट. सो इकोनॉमिक पॉलिसीज के लिए उन्होंने नहीं बनाया था. दिस वाज फॉर द सेक ऑफ द ड्रेन ऑफ इकोनॉमी कुड बी इंक्रीज्ड. और एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन के लिए बनाया गया है कि हमें तो छुट्टी चाहिए, शिमला जाना है तो वहां तक ट्रेन लेके चलो. मूवमेंट ऑफ ट्रूप्स फॉर क्वेलिंग द वेरियस डिस्टर्बेंसेस इन डिफरेंट पार्ट्स ऑफ इंडिया. तो जब भी आंसर लिख रहे हो ना, जहां क्रिटिकली एग्जामिन आता है विद रिस्पेक्ट टू द कॉलोनियल हिस्टोग्राफी, उसका दूसरा पहलू हमेशा लिखो क्रिटिकली एग्जामिन में. लाइक इफ दिस इज इन मेनी वेज डलहौजी वाज द फादर ऑफ मॉडर्न इंडिया या मॉडर्न नेशन, जो भी उस तरीके से क्वेश्चन आता, तो आपको वो तो मेंशन करना पड़ेगा. रेलवे है, पोस्ट ऑफिस है, पीडब्ल्यूडी है, मतलब ये सारे आपके पॉइंट्स आ जाएंगे उसके अंदर. बट ऑल दीज वर डन विद द कीपिंग द इंटरेस्ट ऑफ ब्रिटेन इन माइंड. फिर वो भी एक्सप्लेन करो सेकेंड हाफ में. रेलवे में ये लिमिटेशंस है, पोस्ट ऑफिस में ताकि जल्दी इंफॉर्मेशन यहाँ पे आप पास कर सको. ठीक है. सो वो सारी पर्सपेक्टिव आपको डालना पड़ेगा. इन मॉडर्न इंडिया डायमेंशन मिस हो जाती है आंसर लिखते वक्त. ठीक है. सो दीज 10 मार्कर्स, थोड़ा सा इसके ऊपर अच्छी थिंकिंग अंडरस्टैंडिंग बनाओ. ये कीवर्ड्स को यूज करना शुरू करो. ठीक है ना. लेट्स सी द नेक्स्ट वन. J.T. Sunderland. So he says British rule India was comparable to a banyan tree. Okay. Under a banyan tree, little or nothing can grow. The tree overshadows and kills essentially everything beneath it. The only growth they can live and thrive are the stems or slender branches sent down to the ground from the tree itself. These take roots and develop. Nothing else can. Okay. समझ में आया? This is how they are just comparing it with the banyan tree. Means a superstructure is created, but it is not going to be healthy for the soil. It's not going to be healthy for the area. So पूरी communities which are residing in that area, they are going to suffer because of this. So we have to show the negative side of the British rule. So whenever we have to show the negative side में British में क्या किया जाता है? See the overall their administration. So India, we were ousted from the administration. Only hired in the lower capacity because you can work as translator, you can become a clerk. Education policy, it was with the objective of Lord Macaulay creating a class of Indian which is Indian in blood and color but European in taste, moral, intellect and opinions. Education इसमें आ जाएगा. If we see the economics, this is where they were most lethal. So revenue. Okay, money was collected. Whenever money is collected by the government, this is used for the development of a country. Like if we say in India, हम खुश होते हैं कि revenue targets breach हो गया, तो हमें चलो थोड़ा खुशी होती है कि कुछ ना कुछ बजट में अच्छा आएगा नेक्स्ट टाइम, या फिर exemptions बढ़ेंगे इनकम टैक्स में, something will happen. But here revenue कम हो रहा हो, ज़्यादा हो रहा हो, does not mean unilaterally it's going to reach Britain. Okay. सो इकोनॉमिक्स का तो पूरा ही उठा, उसको हम बाद में जब पढ़ेंगे तब उसमें और अच्छे से इसमें पॉइंट्स आप एडिशन कर पाओगे इकोनॉमिक्स की सारी पॉलिसीज के बारे में. देन वन ऑफ द इम्पॉर्टेंट वर्क ऑफ एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन इज टू इंश्योर रिलीफ मेजर्स, बट देयर वाज नो पॉलिसी फॉर द केस ऑफ famines. Okay. Even in judiciary, press, the forces of racism could be seen. Okay, as and when Indians started the movement, they came up with lethal measures. Jallianwala Bagh massacre. ठीक है. The Rowlatt Act, even though we participated and helped them in the First World War, okay, Rowlatt Act was passed. The manner in which they had taken these suppression and repressive measures against every movement, non-cooperation, civil disobedience, Quit India movement. So all those shows the manner in which they run India as a country. So that is nothing but how a banyan tree is going to treat. Okay, there can be no growth, there can be eventually no outcome. So India was left as a colony, okay, from 25% of the world GDP to 2%. जैसे हाँ, तो ये बनियन ट्री का इम्पैक्ट है. ठीक है, सेम फैक्ट्स है, इधर का इधर करना है, बस उसके साथ कनेक्ट करना है. और इस वाले क्वेश्चन में पॉजिटिव दिखाने की कोशिश मत करना. ठीक है, पॉजिटिव्स अगर दिखा भी रहो तो उसको उस लाइट में दिखाओ कि भाई whatever may be the positives, okay, they were not necessarily directed by the British, they were unintentional outcomes. Yes, okay, उनके लैंग्वेज को यूज कर सकते हो. जैसे ये बोलते हैं ना कि भाई द ब्रिटिश कॉन्क्वेड इंडिया इन अ फिट ऑफ absent mindedness, तो वो absent mindedness नहीं थे. ठीक है ना, only the effects, only the positive effect were absent mindedness. अदरवाइज तो हमेशा कैलकुलेशन करके आते थे कि इससे अपने को यह फायदा होगा. Alright, just like we see in case of education, because of this English education, the ideas of enlightenment, the ideas of French Revolution, etc., they entered India, which led to creation of a middle class, which was going to lead them for the independence, or the freedom movement was based on the cornerstone of the ideas. And these ideas comes from education. ठीक है, so समझ में आया ये वाला. Now let us see the next one, जादूनाथ सरकार. Jaduna Sarkar believes the Muslim state in India lacked a sound economic basis. Peace was anesthesia for society and produced far-reaching economic repercussion. So what he is doing, critiquing the character of the Mughal state, okay, being dependent upon military struggle. As long as the war went on, new territory added, the empire survived, and the moment the expansion of the empire was not possible, it led to the decline. So this is more of about the 18th century state of Mughals. So try to remember these contemporary opinions. Now let us take a debate finally. The manner in which India was occupied, can we call it planned or unplanned? This is the debate which finds its mention in the work of Lord Seeley. The book name is The Expansion of Britain in 1883, and they said it was in a fit of absent-mindedness. Similar kind of viewpoint, it comes from P.J. Marshall, then even Porter, and finally we'll go into the critical analysis, the activities which could link from the beginning itself how company was trying to follow the policy of mercantilism, which is about acquiring the political power so that accumulation of wealth can be done. This is what they were trying to do in case of both Carnatic as well as the Bengal. And later on how this further boosted them when they were able to defeat the Indian powers, they realized they could create an empire. So with time they started flexing their muscles. Okay, so we'll see those time period in the second half, but first let us see the opinions. Okay, these words, these keywords you have to remember. Like if you see the explanation of Lord Seeley, he says the conquest was circumstantial rather than planned event. There was no planning, no element of planning. In the circumstances identified by him, it starts with Anglo-French rivalry and then the Battle of Plassey as well as Buxar. Okay, and after this they had the resources to do what no other power could do, that is they had the resources. Okay, and later on the overseas conquest of Suez Canal, Australia, Burma, etc., all in the name of defending their Indian interest. That's how they were able to create an empire on which the sun never set. Okay, they were able to create an empire over which the sun never set. And they said the company could have conquered all of India before it ended, but it avoided territorial acquisition much of the time. The companies was mostly about profit. It was not just about the military operations. Okay, so this is a perspective which is coming from Lord Silly, and in some specific arguments that can be easily countered. Like he said, he could have easily conquered whole of India by 1800. So that was not possible. Still, they were not able to defeat the Marathas. They were having the peace treaty with the Ranjit Singh. Okay, so it is not feasible what they are saying. And the important part, that Suez Canal, Australia, Burma, etc., everything was just for the sake of British interest. No, it was not so. Other than British interests also, there was specific important requirement. If you see the case of Australia, it was mostly catered after the Empire of America was lost. Okay, so this we can see, but abhi hame analysis ke andar nahi jana. The second argument, it comes from P.J. Marshall. So what he says, that even though a large territorial empire was acquired, till 1784, they had no intention of acquiring territories in India. Okay, that's what he says. Second, he says the empire building activities was started by company and its official operating in India without any proper direction from company or government at London. So one thing which you can easily see, all these historians, they are putting more emphasis on the earlier part, because later wale part mein to sabko clear hai, everything is coming from the Britain. So in order to shed the responsibility of conquering India, they are coming with different categories of justification. This is another justification कि so far it was started by Robert Clive, nobody knows, हमें नहीं पता किसने किया, Robert Clive ने कर दिया, हम तो बाद में पहुंचे. And it was the political fragmentation and instability after the decline of Mughal Empire which facilitated the territorial expansion, and the English were only responding to these developments. They were not taking any unique initiative. This is something which was part of the plan. Okay. Then comes the third one, the Porter perspective. Okay. So this comes from him, and his book name is The Absent-Minded Imperialist. See his viewpoint. So he says most of the history books, they ignored the empire completely. कि इंडिया के बारे में हमने हिस्ट्री में लिखा ही नहीं, तो हम क्या करें? We should have. It was ignored completely and did not even mention India. At least one of those which did was scathing about East India Company and described them as a band of robbers. So what they are doing now, they are criticizing the initial people who were responsible for the creation of the empire, so that they can shed the responsibility and tie it to few important personalities rather than the whole of Britain. And finally, contrary to the claim that imperial culture in Britain impelled its overseas expansion, he concluded that empire arose from merely material reason. We were not taking pride in that. We were not taking pride in that only for the sake of gaining more economy. We were going for the expansion. So these are the three viewpoints, okay, which roughly says the elements of planning were not there or the development were unplanned. Okay. So if a question comes, question is going to become in terms of the statements. Okay. Otherwise तो आपको justification देना पड़ेगा दोनों तरफ का. The question will be mostly with respect, do you think that British did consciously create an empire in India? So there both viewpoints are there. These are the three viewpoints. You can try to remember these perspective starting from Lord Seeley, P.J. Marshall, and then finally Porter. These are the three personalities. Yes. As such कुछ नहीं है, तीनों important है. इसमें अगर question आता है आपको तीनों ही लिखने पड़ेंगे, because all these three people, they are commenting on three different aspects. The first one is mostly about condone कर रहे हैं पूरे को कि नहीं कुछ भी नहीं हुआ है ऐसा, ठीक है, we were absent-minded, it was just circumstantial and हो गया, गलती हो गई, ठीक है. The second, it comes from P.J. Marshall, which said till 1784 there was no plan. Okay, it was done by people who were on the scene. It was not done by, or there was no conscious direction from the crown. And the last one says there were some armed robbers, okay, who did so. हमारी history book में भी नहीं है, तो हमें तो पता ही नहीं. How can you call it? How are we responsible for this? This is the historiography which has developed in Britain with respect to India as a colony. These are the initial three viewpoints. Yes. Exactly. So whatever we see from their side, they can blame company, they can blame personalities like Robert Clive, okay, so that the responsibility should not be transferred to Britain as a nation. So these opinions are mostly going to be like this only. Okay, now we'll see what elements of planning can be seen, how the planning was being done. अब हम इसको review करेंगे from the beginning till the end. So as all of you know, who gave the charter of monopoly? Queen. अब Queen को भी कुछ नहीं पता था. Okay, so it starts from 1600. The charter was given to them. As early as 1686, they tried to fight with Aurangzeb, okay, over the issue of duties. Okay, they were eventually defeated, paid a compensation of 1.5 lakh, and then again their privileges were restored. Then, starting from 1740s, we do see a lot of trend. Okay, how these traders were getting security, who was sending the navy. So company was having its own navy? No, right? They were having this navy at their disposal. So from where this support of navy was coming on? Okay, so this shows the connection between these two. Like if we see the Anglo-French rivalry, had there been no navy to defend the company, could they have won? They would not have won, because the French were defeated in the Battle of Vendivash, where the most important part was with respect to navy. Let us see the more points given in the handouts. Armed trade. So from the beginning, it was an armed trade. They were having security from the beginning. Mutual benefit. The island of Bombay, which they received in dowry, है ना, मतलब इतनी ये ऐसी होती थी डाउरी पहले, ठीक है, बॉम्बे तुम्हारा. So that was given by the Portuguese to the British. All right, and कितना रेंट पे कर रहे थे वो? 10 pound, है ना? Anyone? किसी को चाहिए? So 10 pound. So this is, मतलब इससे ज़्यादा और क्या कर सकते हो? Concession इससे ज़्यादा और क्या करेंगे? So the initial important headquarter, that is Bombay, was eventually given by the Crown. All right. Similarly, the Crown was being given loans by the company. Cash karo. So from the beginning itself, we can see that both understood each other very well. Okay, starting from the charter, starting from the providing of loans, seeing from the acceptance of the island, taking the responsibility of Bombay. All this shows that there was an important understanding between the Crown and the company. Then we see parliamentary regulations. So Parliament was not something which was not aware of these activities. Okay, even before the Regulating Act, by 1767, they were asked to pay royalty of 4 lakh pound every year. जो कमा रहे हो पैसा ज़्यादा हो रहा है, इधर लेके आओ थोड़ा, ठीक है. So why were you asking for this money when you have no role? The Regulating Act also came in the similar manner. All right. Then in 1772, the company was nearly bankrupt. Had there been no specific relation between these two, the company could have left India, because they were not having the resources in 1772 specifically. But they were given a loan of 1.4 million pound, and along with that, they started the process of regulating the company, that is 1773 Regulating Act. So at no point we can deny that there was a definite connection between the king or crown with company. Then even Parliament became interested in the regulation in the affairs of company and tried to regulate it, trying to even get a share of the revenue which they were able to get in India. All right. So this shows the intricate connection between the ruling class and the company, which cannot be demeaned, कि इसका कोई मतलब नहीं है. Yes, at the same time, we can always say that the role played by some people like Robert Clive, they did take some independent decisions. Like if we see in case of Bengal, it was a private venture of Robert Clive. He went to Bengal, saw the condition, and then eventually the treachery was created. So there were some forces, okay? So you have to remember the words periphery, this is one keyword, and metropolis. Okay, so those people who are on the ground, they are at the periphery of the ground. They are at the periphery, while the metropolis, they are the central part of the empire. So what we can accept that the major thrust initially came from the periphery of the empire, because the periphery were these people who were taking these independent decisions. But at the same time, this periphery complete knowledge was there to the metropolis, and there was a working relation between these two. We cannot say that only this periphery was responsible for the creation of empire. Without giving them charter, without providing them the security of navy, okay, without bailing them out when required, without creating the structure for the governance, how could this company could have sustained for such a long time? Okay, by weeding out the foreign rivals. Had British said कि हमारा कोई लेना देना नहीं, आने दो फ्रेंच को, other people could have come, but they were not allowed to come towards India. Who was controlling that? Means, the behest में all these important treaties like 1763, the 7-year war when it was concluded, then in those treaties eventually the asset of India were also exchanged. Okay, so it was always a part of India. They were trying to create an empire in India. Now they are not acknowledging it. Okay, we have done so. That's why we say na कि ठीक है, even if you are blaming the periphery for taking the majority of the initiatives in India, this periphery was intricately linked with the metropolis. The wealth that they were creating for the British government, or the requirement of assets in the form of navy, security, etc. All of this was provided by the metropolis from the beginning itself. So the only illusion which left in India was there was no one to fight with this company. It was not the illusion that they were facing कि ये कैसे हो गया. So this is something which you need to remember. If a question comes on this debate part, first 2-3 initiatives, 2-3 important reports from the British side, which could be of John Seeley, then P.J. Marshall, then finally is Potter. These are the arguments which you have to remember. And then from Indian side, we have to connect starting from 1600 onwards. Charter is going to come. Then they were trying to even dislodge the Mughal Empire at the time of Aurangzeb, fought for that also. And then eventually from 1740s onwards participating in the Carnatic War. Right? And in between Plassey, Buxar, and eventually the expansion. Okay, so if we see the overall, starting from 1700 till 1740, they mostly remain in trade as a trading company. Starting from these Carnatic Wars, most precisely from 1746, they now wanted to engage in the Indian political question, and this continued till 1798, where somehow the company's actions were relatively defensive rather than disproportionately aggressive. With the coming of Lord Wellesley and later on even of Dalhousie, so till 1856, there was a clear design of empire creation, and by 1858 Crown assumed the responsibility for this empire which was created, because they thought had this not be taken, it could be lost. Because if revolt like 1857 will happen time and again, this will take away the jewel in the crown. So that was something which was not going to happen. Okay. So see the conclusion in your handouts. So ultimately, British participated in and profited from company's empire, which makes it difficult to argue that it was acquired in a fit of absent-mindedness. However, it can be said that empire was acquired without the national cognizance, okay, and by a small number of Englishmen who had not the least illusion about what they were doing. So these small number of Englishmen, they were the periphery. ये colonial perspective नहीं है. This is something which at the max, if you tell us, we can accept. ठीक है कि भाई even if it is done by them, then also they were responsible for it. This is the way they were sharing the relationship. Alright. तो इनको याद कर लो. ये phases आपको एक बॉक्स बना के बना सकते हो किसमें क्या specific इन्होंने steps लिए गए हैं. Alright. This was the time when they were trying to create the political empire, when they were trying to become politically relevant, and this was the time when they were pursuing the policy of ring fence, where they were trying to create the buffer states so that their own territory cannot be eventually taken away by the enemy, and they can ensure the upkeep of a very high force without paying for it by following these various treaties which they had signed over the time. Okay, so this is the first debate which you need to understand. इस टॉपिक पे ऐसा क्वेश्चन अभी आया नहीं है कई टाइम से, तो आने को आ सकता है. Remains relevant. Another important topic which we need to understand is nationalism. Okay, so what is this nationalism? How did it develop in India? This has become a key theme of one of the question from last 2 years. पूछते जा रहे हैं कि कैसे इवॉल्व हुआ, what are the factors responsible for it, what is the historiography with respect to this. So we need to understand this, कि how nationalism developed in India and eventually who was responsible for it. The first part of the historiography, this comes from the British. Okay, and the famous personality is Richard Coupling. Okay, so he is the famous personality, Richard Coupling, who says that Indian nationalism, write it down, Indian nationalism was a child of British Raj. So he says Indian nationalism was a child of British Raj. So what do you think? सच्चाई है इसमें कुछ? हाँ. Okay, so if we see the British historiography, why do they say so? Similar viewpoints could be seen in Montfort report, which says politically minded Indians Montfort report also says politically minded Indians are child of British Raj. and we have consciously ensured inculcation of these political ideas. And we have ensured the inculcation of these political ideas. So the question is very difficult relatively, कि what are the factors responsible for the rise of Indian nationalism? So we'll discuss about it, but first we have to understand the perspective. So what are the perspectives? So in order to support this perspective, can we write some points? So what are those positive developments which could be linked to the British rule necessary for the creation of a nation? So can we think of the unification of politico-administration? So we can see unification of the politico-administration, same set of rule of law, then education policies from the beginning itself, yes, you can even mention territorial unification. Yes, yes. Intellectual unification of India by giving impetus to press, like James Augustus. He was one of the earliest Bengal Gazette. It was started by him. Important political unifications. Even if we see the creation of Congress, the creation of Congress can be linked to the activities of British civil servant A.O. Hume. Even the initial form of Indian nationalism, that is it was giving impetus by the social reforms like abolition of sati, okay, yes, legalization of widow remarriage. These reforms which were changing the society, which was against because our society itself was so much divided, it was against the spirit of patriotism or nationalism. Those elements of society could be reduced with these social reforms. As such, no, because the scientific development itself are very less. Okay, anyway, so if we see, these are the positives which we can see from the British side. But whenever we see nationalism, that is directly linked to education. The rise of the middle class, which was eventually imparted education, that was also because of their ideas. So nationalism is antithesis to colonialism or imperialism. So why would a colonial people, why would they impart the ideas of nationalism when it is going to affect the foundation of their empire? This is what the meaning of this. Nationalism is antithesis to colonialism. Okay, all these changes which we have seen so far in political administration, bringing press, etc., they were done for creating an administration machinery or creating an administrative machinery for exploitation of Indian resources. Okay, exploitation of resources on large scale. This is something which was their requirement. That's why this whole machinery, unification of India, etc., was done. It was not done with the idea of imbibing the ideas of a nationalism. Reason being, it is antithesis to colonialism. All right. So that's why we see, rather than the positives, the negatives of the British Raj also helped us a lot in creation of a nationalism. And throughout the world history, we have seen this trend that during the initial stages, nationalism has been a result of colonial policies. Like we can see, exploitation. We see large number of peasant and tribal movements, and all of them, they were linked to exploitation. And that's how we see the rise of a big revolt, the revolt of 1857. Okay, the policies of racism, where Indians were not made part of the higher administration. Okay, they were not even allowed to or considered fit enough to be considered equal to the British in various capacities. It could be even the case of the Ilbert Bill, all of you know about that, okay, where they were trying to give uniformity, okay, or equality in trial of the cases of Europeans, which was not liked by the Europeans later on. So the ideas of racism, exploitation, all of this, or even their policies were guided by only one thing, that was profit. They remained perpetual foreigners. Reason being, they never try to mingle with the Indians. They always try to live in their specific shell. Okay, so all these things, all these negative outcomes were responsible for the rise of incipient nationalism. All right, so rather than being a structured rise of nationalism in India, the initial rise of nationalism can be linked to these exploitation and suffering of people, where they started realizing that if they come together, eventually this will be better for their future. Okay, and this was done by the British Raj. Now let us see the various other factors being responsible for the rise of nationalism. इस topic को अच्छे से समझो, because this is from where conceptual questions are coming. So the initial form of nationalism in India, it has come in the cultural domain. Okay, because whenever outsiders come, they impose their culture. सबसे पहले कहाँ पे आता है आपका counter? It's in cultural domain, and this can be seen in the religious reform movement. Okay, this was the initial form of nationalism, which could be seen in the cultural sphere or cultural domain, where the religious reform movements, like if you see the case of Swami Dayanand Saraswati, who says India is for Indians. Okay, or Raja Ram Mohan Roy, he was against the imposition of Christianity on Indian masses. So they were trying to protect, they were trying to change the Indian tradition so that it can act as a counter to the British values or British culture or their imposition. So the first form of, or the first expression of nationalism can be seen in the cultural domain. All right, you have to remember this. This is very important. The second form of nationalism can be seen in the economic domain. Economic nationalism, where they were able to evaluate the economic policies, the drain of wealth, okay, from India to outside. That's why this was the main reason, one of the main work which we see of the incipient nationalist, that led to the demand of Swaraj, that if we are able to govern ourselves, eventually the exploitation, the suffering which is being faced by the citizens, it can be reduced. Okay, so the initial form of nationalism can be seen in cultural domain, the economic nationalism, where they had even put forward various demands, like from the beginning they started saying that land revenue should be halved, military expenditure should be reduced, India's resources should be used for our own development. So all these are outcomes of the economic nationalism. Then we see after this the rise of political nationalism. This political nationalism could be seen in the creation of organization, like the creation of Congress in 1885. Then within the shade of political nationalism, we can see moderate nationalism. The moderate nationalism believed in the sense of justice of the British. Okay, and they said with reforms, eventually India could have self-governance. Then we see the rise of extremists. Okay, and these extremist form of nationalism had some different agenda from the before. They believed in passive resistance, not eventually assigning with the government. So they are against those policies. Like one of the major policy was the partition of Bengal. They were not going to concur with the demand. Right. Then comes the role of Gandhian nationalism, which became more comprehensive. We see increase in the capacity of the masses. All of what they were now tried to be included in this form of nationalism. In moderate nationalism, there was no faith in the capacity of the masses. Their objective, it was very limited, and they even avoided social reforms. But when it comes to extremists, so they believed in the participation of masses. That can be seen from the Swadeshi movement onwards. But their methods again, they were relatively unclear. Okay, हर किसी के बीच में अपना अलग-अलग feudal हो गया. Then finally comes Gandhian. So Gandhian, it was a mixture of moderates and the extremists. Okay, so he was a mixture of moderates and the extremists. So he used the means of extremists to achieve the goals of moderates. Okay, so this was Gandhian nationalism, which included everyone within the Indian society. Then we see the flavor of socialism, which believed in complete independence, nothing less than that, complete independence, as well as it should also ensure not only political democracy, because so far we have focused on political democracy. They wanted social as well as economic democracy. So this was another form of nationalism. Okay, along with this, we also see revolutionary extremism. It again has certain phases. Initially, if we see from the Chapekar brother event, so they believed in individual heroism. Then they also started creating organization within India as well as outside. Then they even believed, they started participating in the movements like the non-cooperation movement. And once it was called off, they again went back to their own ways. And by the time of the Bhagat Singh, they started believing that individual heroism will not lead to independence. And they were required to support the larger forces or the masses. Okay, so this is the role of revolutionary extremism, eventually the creation of the Indian National Army. All this is part of this phenomena. Along with this, one more shade of nationalism, it is known as subaltern nationalism. This subaltern nationalism belongs to the people from the below. Okay, and this is the school which eventually talks about the contribution of peasant and tribal movements, the contribution of non-elite people in the independence of India. So that includes everyone, women, traders, all those association even which are not being recognized in the history, whose contribution has not been given meaningful pages in our history books. That is the part of this subaltern nationalism, and they consider all these nationalism as elite as hollow. Okay, they call themselves as the real face of nationalism and the rest as hollow. समझ में आया? ये concept याद रखना. This is being asked time and again. Alright, this is the story of Indian nationalism. Eventually, one more nationalism erupted from 1937 onwards, and that was religious nationalism. Okay, and this was mostly guided by the religious organization, Hindu Mahasabha on one side and Muslim League, which became extreme and made it so difficult that eventually this was responsible. Okay, this was responsible for the partition of India. There is a very beautiful analysis which says that Congress was always trying to put too much emphasis on secularism. That's why these other political parties, they were not able to see themselves within the fold of Congress, because they consider religion as a more stronger basis for the unification of people. So their nationalism was different from this secular agenda which was considered by the Congress. That's why this religious nationalism was eventually going to create problem in terms of communal rights, direct action day, and eventually the partition of India. This nationalism was very active and eventually responsible for the partition of India. ठीक है, समझ में आया the whole theory of this nationalism working along with the Indian freedom movement, and this is a very important topic. Okay, it's a very important topic. आपको इसकी understanding बना के रखनी पड़ेगी. Relatively very less. That can only be seen in the organization of the peasant and tribal movements. So they were mostly along with the subaltern. ठीक है, तो कम्युनिस्ट का ज़्यादा रोल उसी में ही है इंडिया में, अदरवाइज too much role is not there. Like there can be with respect to M.N. Roy, he asked for the creation of Constituent Assembly. That was one role. ठीक है, initially they were also responsible for putting pressure on the British, but after the Second World War outbreak, communist and capitalist became same. So eventually they did not participate in Quit India, and after that they became irrelevant. They are going to again rise from 1946 onward in Telangana, etc., which eventually will lead to the final creation of the Nationalism. Okay, so उनका contribution उस तरीके से कम हो जाता है. Rest it's also about researches, because whatever we have read, this is what it is. आगे चल के कुछ और चेंज होगा तो तब चेंज कर लेंगे ओपिनियन. अभी तक तो इससे काम चल जा रहा है, मार्क्स आ जाते हैं. That's how it is. Anyway, so you're able to understand. अभी तक लेकिन हमारा आंसर कंक्लूड नहीं हुआ है. The question was first that India's nationalism can be considered is as a child of the British Raj. This comes from Richard Coupling. ठीक है. Then the second comes from the Montfort report, which say politically minded Indians are our children. That's what they say. But then we see the various arguments to support them. Then we also see rather than the positive factors, the more eminent factors were the negative ones. Now, what are the other factors which are responsible for the rise of nationalism? We have just understood the theory of nationalism, how it has played out across the 150 years in India. That we have seen. But we have to also understand what were the other factors responsible for this. So, the various factors which you need to remember, agar question aata hai, just like in this fashion that we have seen, initially it will be the socio-religious reform movement. Okay, what was the major contribution of the social-religious reform movements? Yes, the creation of unity, self-confidence, okay, patriotism, by making sure that people are not divided on the basis of caste, etc. They could see themselves as Indians by coming up with various patrikas, okay, by creating that you can say atmosphere in which people can come and unite. That was started by the social-religious reform movements. Then we see the creation of an educated middle class with the policies of the Lord Macaulay, etc., which will eventually later on help in the or lead, they will become the lead intellectual class. Then the politics of association, the creation of various association at the political level. Okay, the creation of policies can be seen from the initial one, Zamindari Association से लेके all the way up to the Native Association and finally the creation of the Congress. तो इसमें 3-4 points आप इसमें add करोगे कि how this was responsible for that. Okay, then the reactionary policies which we have seen during the time of Lord Lytton, okay, they were also responsible for this. Reason being, he was the one who came up with the Vernacular Press Act, okay, and even after that also the age of civil services were reduced 21 to 19. Arms Act was brought in so that the right to bear arms was taken away from the Indians. It was heavily, yes. So all those things were done, and Delhi Darbar eventually, when India was facing a very high level of famine. Then comes the Ilbert Bill controversy. This Ilbert Bill controversy was also important for India because Lord Ripon, what he wanted that everybody should be equal, at least in the judiciary. But a European defense organization was created, and this was going to fight against the Ilbert Bill. And as all of you know, the Ilbert Bill controversy was like an eye opener for Indians. So what was being done? They wanted to create an equal kind of judiciary, but they came up with one system in which the Europeans or the Americans, they are going to have a right to jury, and 7 out of these 12 people who will be part of this jury are going to be either American or Europeans. तो काम ही खत्म हो गया. They are always going to give decision in the favor of the Europeans, so Indians will never get justice. So this was also an important event being responsible for the rise of nationalism in India. So these are the various factors which you have to remember along with the positives and the negatives of the British Raj. So जो इन्होंने starting में बोला था, that would be your conclusion. That has come from Bipan Chandra. So Bipan Chandra says Indian nationalism was an unwanted child of British Raj. Yes, Indian nationalism was an unwanted child of British Raj. Which it sought to kill at birth and strangulate it subsequently. So Indian nationalism was an unwanted child of British Raj, which it sought to kill at birth, कि बचपन में मारने की बहुत कोशिश करी, ठीक है, और जब वो नहीं हो पाया देन गला घोटने की बहुत बार कोशिश की, ठीक है. So this is going to be your conclusion on this topic. Now come to page number 4. So this is something which you need to understand कि हर कोई इंडिया को इमेजिन कैसे कर रहा था. Everybody's imagination is different, है ना. चाहे आज प्यार मोहब्बत की बातें कर लो, वैलेंटाइंस डे, सबके लिए प्यार अलग है, किसी के लिए यूपीएससी है, किसी के लिए कुछ ठीक है. सो इमेजिनेशन इज ऑलवेज गोइंग टू बी डिफरेंट ऑफ डिफरेंट काइंड ऑफ पीपल. द सेम हैज बीन अ कंटेस्टेड टेरेन. लाइक व्हेन वी से इंडिया वी फील लाइक हाँ हमारा एक मैप दिमाग में आता है, दिस इज व्हाट इज इंडिया, एंड इवेंचुअली एवरीबडी इज सेम. देयर इज यूनिटी इन डाइवर्सिटी. दिस इज व्हाट वी सी, बट दिस इज नॉट द रियलिटी. Everybody has a different way of seeing India, and this is something which you need to understand. Okay, so read quickly page number 4 and 5. Let's discuss. Let us see the various viewpoints. इनको समझने की कोशिश करना. It's all about the perspectives. ठीक है, don't have to take it emotionally. ये क्या हो गया, वो क्या हो गया. These are all perspectives. Let us see the first one, the perspective of nationalist school of historiography. Now, somebody who is a nationalist, they're always going to point out only the positives. They will never point out the negatives. Okay, that is very clear. Let us see what they are saying. They focus primarily on the supremacy of nationalist ideology कि हम भारतीय हैं. ठीक है, this is the nationalist ideology and a national consciousness to which all other form of consciousness were assumed to be subordinate. Means even if you have conflict among yourself, उसको छोड़ दो. You are only just like the Gita. ठीक है, you have only one objective, that is to become independent, and for that you have to unify yourself. So this is the first method of imagination of India. This can be seen from the nationalist school of historiography. Now, this has been countered by a neo-traditionalist school. So, this traditionalist schools, what they say, that rather than modern category of nation or class, India has been mostly been united on the basis of the various other social formation like linguistic region or as well as caste or religious communities. Okay, so this is something which comes from their voice. Okay, and for that what they say, they eventually say that it is because of the innovations which were done by the British like Western education and political representation. All right, and majority of the people, they were not mostly touched by the forces of nationalism until Gandhiji appeared on the scene, that is 1920s. This is the second opinion of neo-traditionalists. The third one comes from the Cambridge school. Now this Cambridge school, as you can see, this is the colonial school. So what they say, there was series of localized events. कभी ये बोलते हैं स्वदेशी कर लेते हैं. Sometimes they used to say कि let us do civil disobedience. So these were just like something, some law and order problems. Okay, rather than phases of nationalism. So this is the third. So it is a series of localized movements. Remember these keywords because you will not be able to remember this whole handout. The keyword you have to underline. So what they say, India was not a nation but an aggregate of disparate national groups. इनका जो मन में आया करते रहे. So this completely de-recognized the nationalist ideology because it is mostly the colonial. Then comes the Marxist. What will be the opinion of Marxist? Okay, bourgeois captured the main power. Okay, and they ignored the interest of the majority of the people. So it was the proletariat which nationalism was the real nationalism, or this is how they imagined. This comes from them. But there has been change of these Marxist school over a period of time. Firstly comes from S.N. Mukherjee. He points out the complexities, multiple layers, meanings, and simultaneously he says that rather than just class, it is also the caste, because in India without caste nothing happens. From the beginning till the end, caste is something which is going to affect you. Then comes Sumit Sarkar, which says that there was legitimacy of nationalism, but it does not ignore the internal tensions within it. And he again contains the elite and other as populist. Then comes Bipan Chandra. Now, Bipan Chandra says there were two categories of contradiction in India. The first one between the interest of India versus the interest of Britain. This was the primary contradiction. Then there was secondary contradiction. These secondary contradictions are between the interests of the variety of the people. And with the period of time, by 1947, the primary contradiction was able to overweigh the secondary contradiction. This is the perspective given by Bipan Chandra. Then comes Partha Chatterjee and talks about that Indian nationalism in India was assigned a privileged position by its Western educated political leadership, was a different but derivative discourse from the West. Whatever ideas they have learned from there, eventually that has derived from there itself. Then come Ashish Nandi, which mostly says the viewpoint which we have seen, that nationalism is antithesis to imperialism. So because of the negative forces of imperialism, we see the rise of nationalism. And C.A. Bailey talks about Indian nationalism being built on pre-existing sense of territoriality, a traditional patriotism. So when these questions will be asked, see the conclusion that Indian nationalism is an intensely contested discursive train from which it is difficult to arrive at a dialectical middle ground or even an eclectic view that would be acceptable to all. This can be a statement, and this will say critically examine. And these are the various viewpoints which you have to write. The final 2-3 lines, they can be your conclusion that India was a plural society and therefore Indian nationalism was bound to have many voices as different class, group, community, etc. interpret their nation in various and sometimes even contradictory ways. So this question is all about how people were able to see India. It's not about nationalism. Nationalism as a whole हमने अलग से discuss कर लिया और ये वाला आपको लिखना भी नहीं है unless these kinds of questions are asked. The question can be that what are the various ways in people imagined India as a nation. This can be a question direct, or the second, that the historiography of how Indians imagined their nation has been mostly controversial in nature. So there you have to remember at least these 5 to 6 viewpoints. Okay, so these are the viewpoints. If we can remember them, if any question comes, we can eventually score marks. The next theory, I think it is very easy, the safety valve theory. This is again contesting the political nationalism, the initial political nationalism or the creation of a polity, okay, creation of an party. Let us see. So from where does this safety valve theory comes from? It comes from the autobiography of A.O. Hume, which was written by William Wedderburn. This was put forward by Lala Lajpat Rai in his book. कौन सा book नहीं in paper? Yes, Young India. Okay, so by 1916 this was becoming very popular. All right. So this question has been asked time and again by UPSC, 10 marker में, 20 marker में, and this theory has mostly been rejected now. Okay, but we have to understand what were the various points which were put forward or the arguments put forward for this safety valve theory. So what were those arguments? Tell me. Yes, so the theory is like this. A.O. Hume created Congress, okay, in 1885 because in 1878 he had seen various secret reports. 30,000 reports were there which were seen by A.O. Hume, all right, and he realized that a revolt just like 1857 could happen if some of the grievances of the people were not addressed. Second, he had a network of Baba and Chela. They used to do meditation and used to find out what is in the heart of the people. Okay, so this is again something which is put forward for this safety valve theory. And that's how A.O. Hume took the initiative, and after his retirement eventually pursued some of the elite people, and these elite people were eventually going to serve the British Raj rather than become the face of Indian nationalism. This is the theory of safety valve, which has questioned the nationalistic viewpoint of Congress. In today's time, this can be accepted, but previously we have to go into the historiography. कहाँ तक सच है, कहाँ तक नहीं है. But this is how it is. Let us see why it does not satisfactorily explain the foundation. First of all, the 7 volumes which consist of those 30,000 reports, etc., nobody has been able to trace them. Second, A.O. Hume, he was in finance department, okay, and this home department used to be in Delhi rather than Shimla. He was in Shimla. So how can he have access to these many reports? Those times, even if intelligence bureau was there, कितने लोग को employ कर लोगे, है ना? आज इतने होकर भी तो report बनती नहीं है time पे. At that point of time, there are going to be 100, 200 people in intelligence. How can they create so many reports? That is questionable. Why did he waited for 7 years from 1878 to 1885? How can we explain that? Okay. Then Dufresne. When Dufresne in 1888 said we cannot allow the Congress to continue to exist. So had it been an alliance, okay, they could not have criticized it. Like he said, it was a microscopic minority. Okay, it was only a Hindu speaking body. All right. And even if we see Surendranath Banerjee, he was creating the Indian associations, and for that one all party meeting had happened in 1883, and he was going to do the second in 1885. All right, that's why many people from Calcutta did not participate in the first session of Congress, because that session was going on parallelly. So with research we have been able to see that eventually A.O. Hume, he did not like Surendranath Banerjee, and he had seen that a political opinion was shaping in India. And that's why it would be better if we create a Congress under his presidentship so that it can easily be managed. Okay, and British perspective could be put forward. So this was the stance of A.O. Hume. While on the other hand, why did these Indian leaders accepted the leadership of A.O. Hume? What's the reason behind it? The reason was Indians, they were afraid that if they'll start a political association, it could easily be crushed down by the British imperialism. Any activity will be considered as sedition. Okay, so that's why they kept A.O. Hume in the front, so that if anything is going to happen, सबसे पहले इनको होगा, बाद में बोलेंगे इन्होंने बुलाया था. Okay, so this is what they say, that A.O. Hume, he was used as a lightning conductor. Okay, so whatever thrashing etc. is going to happen, that is going to happen through A.O. Hume. So that is why the Indian nationalists, they followed A.O. Hume, and this is how the Congress was created. So all the time UPSC asks the question like this, 10 marker में आता है, that safety valve theory did not explain the foundation of the Indian National Congress satisfactorily. So what does satisfactorily explain it? क्या है? Okay, had not been in 1885, an all India platform was in the offing, होने वाला था वो. We have seen the creation of various association at the level of the various provinces. मद्रास महाजन सभा, बॉम्बे प्रेसिडेंसी एसोसिएशंस, कलकत्ता लेवल पे बन चुकी थी काफ़ी सारी. नाउ द रिक्वायरमेंट वाज देयर एंड इंडियन एसोसिएशन वाज ट्राइंग टू डू सो. Okay, Surendra Banerjee were doing so. That's why eventually it was going to happen. If not in 1885, it could have happened in the coming decade. So we cannot say, had this been created out of nowhere, without the circumstances which we have seen from 1814 onwards all the way up to 1870. So those 3 decades of political activity, if that would not have been there, then there would have been any chance of acceptance of the safety valve theory. But it was a gradual approach. By 1880s, a national requirement was there, and that's why it was created. Even though A.O. Hume took the lead because of his own personal observations about Surendranath Banerjee. So this is the thesis, very easy to understand, not that much difficult. That's why we will not spend much time on this. And आप एक बार पढ़ लेना इसको, you will understand it. इस पे I think 2020 में ही आ चुका है क्वेश्चन. Now, with respect to partition, there are so many viewpoints which we need to understand. Okay, the first one would be, who is responsible? Who is responsible for the partition? Who is responsible for the partition of India? Jinnah, most popular. Then? तो अगर हम इसको ठीक से समझें, partition is something which has happened because we were not able to create a nationalistic ideology which could include all the people. Somehow we were not able to do so, otherwise partition would not have happened. So different actors have played part in this. If we see the case of British, their policies of divide and rule, this was responsible for creation of this two nation state theory. Okay, this laid the foundation by creating a kind of wedge between these two communities by giving them separate electorate. Alright, so initially it was the divide and rule policy of the British, which they were not able to unturn in the 1940s when they were not accepting the demand of Pakistan. Okay, so initially the responsibility lies on the British. Okay, the second responsibility, it lies on Muslim League. Why Muslim League? Because the Muslim League, it was led initially, it was a relatively modern organization. After the failure in the elections of 1937, they turned towards religious nationalism or communalism. Communalism is something which they turned towards, and they became intransient in their approach. Okay, when Congress resigned in 1939, Day of Deliverance was then this demand for Pakistan in 1940, Lahore Resolution came. Okay, then eventually the various constitutional talks, and they backed out from majority of them. Okay, like the Shimla conference, this could not work because they said all the representative of Muslims, they should come from Muslim League. They are not going to come from Congress, and they were always saying like Congress should accept it is a Hindu organization. Okay, this was the initial, and then eventually first they accepted the cabinet mission plan, and then eventually on 29th of July 1940 it was rejected. Then they even advocated the scrapping of the Constituent Assembly in which our constitution was created. They tried to become part of the interim government and tried to create non-cooperation within that also. They were the one who were always saying divide and quit. Okay, that divide पहले आप divide करो फिर आप quit करो rather than quit. And the Congress was going with quit India and they were going with divide and quit. Divide should always come first, then the quit is second. So for them, the partition itself was the independence. For them, partition was independence. Partition became their major goal rather than ousting the British. Okay, had British left without partitioning India, things could have been entirely different. That's why partition became the major goal for Muslim League. That's why it is responsible for partition. We can see it in terms of India, that a part of India was relatively taken away. But if we see from the perspective of Pakistan, for them this is the noble cause, a creation of a nation. Okay, so for Muslim League, partition itself was a goal, at least from 1940 onwards. But the responsibility cannot be fixed just to British and Muslim League. It should also be linked to Congress. And why Congress? That's also we have to understand. The Congress, it has two specific roles. The major role was to get independence, and it was founded. The second major goal, that was to create a nation by weaving various community, by ensuring their differences can be reduced. This was the responsibility of the Congress, and in this second responsibility, Congress failed. Why did it fail? That's something which we have to understand. Okay, even in terms of making them part of the large movement, they succeeded only at the time of non-cooperation movement. Did not succeed in civil disobedience or even the participation in Quit India. It was relatively less. Okay, they were the one who accepted this separate electorate. Once it was accepted by the major political party, this could never be reversed. Okay, so it is something which we need to understand. कि responsibility सबका ही आने वाला है. Alright, this is the easiest method to explain the partition. कि who is responsible. So morally, British and Muslim League को ज़्यादा हिस्सा जाता है, and then eventually the failures of Congress as an organization for integration of Muslims within the fold of the Congress superstructure, where they faltered. Alright, so let us see page number 1, read it, then we will discuss the major points.
Was seen to be pro-socialist side, whereas America wanted to not to give such a huge territory to a person who had a socialist mentality. So he was just a side here. So that approach.
Yeah, like no, first we should always consider the internal dynamics. सिर्फ उस रीजन से तो पार्टीशन नहीं होता. नहीं, सिर्फ वो तो बस अब लास्ट में है कि पावर को डाइवेस्ट करो और निकलो यहाँ से किसी तरीके से. In 1947 the British themselves were very desperate. अनाउंस किया था है ना कि जून 1948 तक जाएंगे, बट उन्होंने 3-4 महीने के अंदर ही वाइंड अप कर दिया. That was different pressure, but here it's majorly about who is responsible. If US wanted, they could not have partitioned India. नहीं कर सकते थे. पार्टीशन क्यों हुआ? बिकॉज देयर वाज मुस्लिम लीग, दे वाज आस्किंग फॉर इट रिपीटेडली. एंड व्हाई डिड जिन्ना रीच सच अ पोजीशन? दे वर गिवन बैकिंग बाय द ब्रिटिश. ब्रिटिश का बहुत ही सिंपल पॉलिसी था कि इवेंचुअली द मुस्लिम शुड बी यूज्ड whenever the forces of nationalism are going to rise. हिंदू मुस्लिम स्टार्ट कर दो, ठीक है. Finally this the Muslim League became a bigger monster where they could not be mowed down very easily by the British themselves, because at the time of even cabinet mission plan the demand of the Pakistan was rejected. So later times में British were in favor of creation of a united India, but by that time Muslim League had become adamant. They were not going to stop it. And throughout this time, starting from the beginning of the 20th century till the 1947, Congress also faltered at many places. So those are the responsibility of the Congress. So the role of British is more important in the inception of this problem of partition. Okay, once this began, using it every time they wanted to destroy the unity of the Indians by dividing it along communistic lines. For that they have taken various steps. Then the responsibility lies on Muslim League for not trying to even reconcile on the issues which were bothering it, which could have affected the interest of Muslim as a specific class or religious class. Okay, and the steps taken by them like direct action day, in transition in the interim government, or asking for the abolition of the constitutional assembly, all those things. And overall Congress at different patches, that it was the responsibility of the Congress to weave a community which could include everyone in India. So all these three, so initial major responsibility is of British, then creating it a total political program, this was done by the Muslim League, and finally at the cultural level it was the failure of the Congress. Okay, so this is how we should see the responsibility part. So see page number 8. So let us see the view number 1. The early nationalist accounts the blame for partition mostly on British and the Muslim League. Okay, so what they say, the Congress tried to bring everyone under the umbrella, but separate electorate, policy of divide and rule, intransigence of Jinnah, and communal and reactionary grip over the League led to partition of the subcontinent. The Congress was unable to reach to the Muslim masses and therefore reluctantly accepted the wishes of the majority of Indian Muslims. This is the first viewpoint. But in the reviewed historiography, we see that Congress should be substantially blamed for the partition of the country. So if we see the opinion of Ayesha Jalal, so she is saying Jawaharlal Nehru and Vallabhbhai Patel, they wanted to create a strong state rather than a confederate state, which was offered by the cabinet mission plan. Okay, grouping बनाएंगे A, B, C, कभी इधर 10 साल तक constitution. It was a very you can say not well cooked plan. Okay, so that's why they rejected the confederation. It is argued that partition was imposed by central leader of Congress who favored a tighter grip over the provinces and unitary conception of nationalism. So this comes from the perspective of Ayesha Jalal. In fact, Ayesha Jalal also says that Jinnah was using the demand of partition to stay politically relevant. Okay, to stay politically relevant, and initially it was given too much of seriousness was being seen in this demand, but later on he could see कि this card can be played. This comes from Ayesha Jalal. Okay? So try to understand the partition responsibility is going to lie on the shoulders of all these three forces, British, Muslim League as well as Congress, all three. अगर question आता है तो इसको ध्यान रखना. The second eventual question is, was this partition inevitable? Okay, or could it be avoided? कर सकते थे या नहीं कर सकते थे? तो इसके भी देखो phases की तरह है ये, ठीक है, कब तक unavoidable था और कब ये avoidable रहा. दोनों तरफ से इसमें व्यू पॉइंट्स हैं, तो you can just quickly read page number 9 and 10. हाँ? पार्टीशन मतलब व्हेन वी टॉक अबाउट द फैनिंग ऑफ द रिलीजियस फर्वर, तो वहां पे तो उनका रोल भी आता है, ठीक है, बट who was most vocal about this demand? Because they were asking for Akhand Bharat. They were not, they can criticize maybe the religious activists or something like that, but they were not against the partition. They wanted Akhand Bharat. तो इसलिए हम उसको नहीं लिख सकते यहाँ पे who is responsible for the partition. आजकल की पॉलिटिक्स को मत लिखना वहाँ पे, ठीक है. इट इज, देखो, पॉलिटिकल नैरेटिव इज ऑलवेज नॉट फॉर द इंटेलेक्चुअल क्लास, ठीक है. इट्स फॉर केटरिंग और द इलेक्टोरल विक्ट्रीज. इवन वट एवर दे से दैट मे नॉट बी ट्रू, वो उसको मानते भी नहीं होंगे, बस बोल के घर आके जल्दी से चुप होके बैठ गए, बोला है डन. लेट अस सी व्हाट विल हैपन.
We can also mention about the two nation.
यस यस. तो देखो, इसमें काफ़ी सारे व्यू पॉइंट्स हैं. सम से इट वाज अनअवॉइडेबल, ओके, एंड फॉर दैट लाइक वी सी द पॉलिसीज ऑफ द हिंदू महासभा, okay, it find the fanaticism against of the Muslim League. Similar can be seen from the viewpoint of Muslim League, how it started the communal riots etc. during the later phases. So that's why the partition became unavoidable. Okay. Similarly, if we see from Pakistan perspective, their historiography considered it as a quite logical and inevitable and the growth of Muslim nationalism in the depth of Indian history. Muhammad Ali Jinnah, now he was very skillful, and he had said with a lot of confidence that I have created Pakistan with the help of a pen and a typewriter. Okay, so this is something which he has taken pride in. I have created with the help of my speeches and a typewriter. He was a charismatic personality, and he was the one, had he given nod eventually for even any kind of intermediation or कुछ भी demand रखते other than partition, it could have been catered, but that was eventually not done so. Okay, देखो अब folk ये होता है ना कि folk में अपनी narratives हैं वो अलग चलते हैं कि he wanted to become the prime minister but Gandhi ji became intransigent कि नहीं, only Nehru will become PM, nobody else will be allowed, so that was not accepted, all those things. But reality किसी को नहीं पता है. Reality is something which is always a narrative of someone. आप भी आज कुछ सोच रहे हो, कल कुछ सोचोगे तो क्या बोलोगे, कल वाली रियलिटी खराब थी. दिस इज समथिंग विच यू आर फीलिंग एट दैट पॉइंट ऑफ टाइम. आपकी रियलिटी यहीं तक लिमिटेड है. somebody else's perspective will be entirely different. So what is exactly responsible for this, उसके बस broad contours आप देख सकते हो. You cannot say the eventual. अब आप you cannot call Jinnah today कि क्या reason है बता मुझे. I want to know, मैं history का student हूँ. That it cannot be done. It will only be through his acts, and whatever acts that has been done eventually are recorded. और उसी के interpretation कभी left जाता है, कभी right जाता है. If we make it very simple, yes, he was the one who was responsible for it. We can directly say so. But is it that straightforward? अकेला इंसान नहीं कर सकता. But once such a person gain popularity, people get confident. Yes, he is going to save our interest. So people started believing in his ideas. So that also became a reason for that. Right. Yes, that is also a reason of the failure of the Congress. In 1937, Jinnah said we can create a government. साथ मिलके बना लेते हैं. Yes, so Muslim League was not able to create even in one single province, and Congress was able to create in 8 out of 11. So this was the time when the rudeness, okay, or the overconfidence of the Congress eventually, we have the support of all the Muslim masses. This is going to cost dearly in the coming decade. That was also, at that point of time, they should have been conciliatory. They did not know the partition is going to happen. So if we review the history, or if we see the benefit of the hindsight, 1937 is a strategic blunder. At that point of time, the political equations could have been sorted. Things could have been entirely different. Okay, because तब तक ऐसा कोई negotiation भी नहीं हुआ था for the transfer of power. The transfer of power negotiation eventually they began after the end of the World War. But by that time, all the destruction had already happened. 37, resigning of the Congress ministry, day of deliverance, demand for Pakistan. Yes. Then the resolution of divide and quit. Then eventually they were always like Congress should first accept that it is a Hindu organization, which they will never do. ऐसी ऐसी डिमांड रख दो उनके सामने, कोई मानेगा ही नहीं. ठीक है, this is how it is. So these are the viewpoints which are about कि it was unavoidable. Okay, when people who say it is avoidable, they specifically said this could have been done, and it remained unavoidable only after 29th of July 1946. Before that, it could have been avoided. This was the day on which cabinet mission plan was rejected by the Muslim League, and after that eventually they shifted towards direct action day, that we are going to create Pakistan through direct action if the decision is not going to be taken by the British. And it was this time of communal riots, okay, law and order problem, administrative incapacity, lack of action on the behalf of the British government. Okay, the British government is now pushing for partition. We want to go. अब उनको एकदम से पता लगा नहीं घर जाना है मुझे, ठीक है. And they had said Lord Mountbatten, he arrived in March 1947. Within the next 40 days, he went through 133 rounds of talks with all the parties. सबको पूछा तेरे को क्या चाहिए बताइए, क्या चाहिए वो चाहिए, सब कहाँ ठीक है, ओके डन डन डन, सब मिलते हैं, बाद में मिलते हैं, दिस इज द फाइनल प्लान, एक्सेप्ट करना है तो बताओ. ही इवेंचुअली assured Congress that I am going to create maximum India. Okay, and that was eventually accepted. Okay, so it was the pressure tactics of the British. Had British been able to control these communal riots, being able to reduce the divisive politics which was going on in India from 1946 onwards on a very high scale, things could have been different. But British at that point of time, they shared their responsibility that we are not going to take any action because they themselves wanted to get out of this. Okay, so after this it became relatively unavoidable, but before that it remained avoidable, could have been avoided. Yes. Initially Muslim League ने accept कर लिया था, ठीक है, but then Congress ने ड्रामा शुरू किया कि we are not going to accept. Then they said okay, we will only accept some of the provisions of the cabinet mission plan, like we are going to accept the creation of constituent assembly, all like that. When the Governor General Lord Wavell was not agreeing to the demand of Muslim League of creating an interim government without Congress, so they said भाड़ में जाओ, we are also rejecting it. ठीक है, so once they rejected, after that they never came back to the table. Okay, so once it was rejected, yes. Although that was something which cabinet mission plan was taken by both parties a victory. Both had differential kind of understanding. उसमें बड़े अजीब अजीब से provisions है. After 10 years there is going to be a review. If you want to get out, you can even change your constitution, this and that, etc. So both were thinking कि हाँ ठीक है. The Muslim League were thinking कि okay, they have nominally accepted the demand of Pakistan because a grouping of the largely Muslim states have been created. Okay, but the Congress was thinking that these groups are not compulsory in the long run, so they can come out of it. So interpretation पे game चलना शुरू हो गया. The Congress initially did not accept, but then they say okay, some limited part of it we are going to accept, so that constitutional advancement for the transfer of power can take place. Okay, but by that time Muslim League said कि अपना इज्जत ही नहीं है कुछ, ठीक है, we are not creating the interim government, हमने accept कर लिया, हमें नहीं कर रहे, उनके पीछे पड़े वो, at least accept our demand first. So this is how the narrative became very relatively, rather than thinking about territorial integrity, economic independence, etc., narrative went towards in the completely different directions. Okay, and this was a time like suppose you also say कि भाई if every day communal riots are happening, what solution do you have? ठीक है ना, इससे अच्छा you whatever territory that can be in your control, try to unify it first, because it was not so कि rest of the princely states they were also like कि हाँ ready कि हम इंडिया है, ठीक है. There were these more than 560 princely state, majority of them they were given blank checks by जिन्ना जितना जीरो डालना है डाल लो, राजा पाकिस्तान में लाहौर में लंच करते हैं, ठीक है. तो those were also the problems. It is not so कि for what फाइट किस चीज़ के लिए है वो समझना बहुत ज़रूरी है. तो वो जब इवेंचुअली इनको समझ में आ गया कि नाउ इट इज़ नॉट पॉसिबल एट ऑल. ओके, ब्रिटिश इज सेइंग ट्रांसफर ऑफ पावर करते, दे सेड डिवाइड एंड क्विट. So at every juncture, one or the other became the culprit for the partition. Maybe in the first decade it was the British which came up with this separate electorate. In the second, it was the acceptance by the Congress of the separate electorate. Okay, by third and fourth, they were not being considered, made sure enough sure that they should become part of the movement by the Congress. By 1937, the Congress did not realize कि if they'll do such kind of activities, with respect to Muslim League, so they came up with various fabricated reports known as Pirpur reports. Okay, which said that these various Congress ministries, they are harassing the Muslim women as well as their, in fact, with respect to their religious institutions also, they are doing some work which is against it. So all those things were being, then the narrative was set. Then once ब्रिटिश का पता क्या था, ब्रिटिश यूज दिस ऑन इंसिडेंटल ग्राउंड कि आज जरूरत है, ठीक है, हिंदू वर्सेस मुस्लिम करने का, तो आज करना पड़ेगा, देन विल लीव इट, देन अगेन विल डू इट. तो उनके लिए पीरियोडिक था ये कि व्हेनेवर दे वांट टू ब्रेक, लाइक एट द टाइम ऑफ क्विट इंडिया मूवमेंट, मुस्लिम लीग वाज सपोर्टिंग द गवर्नमेंट, इट वाज नॉट सपोर्टिंग द एक्टिविटीज ऑफ कांग्रेस. Okay, but once it was concluded, then again Congress was getting support from the government because they were thinking this is the main party for the transfer of power. But by 1945, PC Joshi also commented that not accepting or not considering Muslim League as a significant force in Indian politics itself is stupidity. Because by that time, once they reject, the British would go because they were able to get a veto on every decision. That's why they had become a significant force. And by 1946, when they were ready for the elections, at this point of time, Muslim League was able to win handsomely in the Muslim-dominated provinces. So it had become a major party with respect to that by 1946 end. So it has legitimacy in terms of the popular democracy, right? सबसे बड़ी legitimacy किस पे आती है? Elections के through आती है. In that they were winning, and Jinnah was able to block or checkmate every move from the side of the Congress. So by 1946 and it had become more or less certain, and as all of us know, when Lord Mountbatten said, he said cabinet mission plan is a dead horse, I'm not going to keep it around for the while, I'm going to come up with different solution. So he said कि भाई we'll start transferring power from South India, फिर North India में करेंगे. तो सबको परेशान कर दिया उन्होंने एक महीने के अंदर, क्या करना है क्या नहीं करना है. बर्ड डे की प्लान लेके आ गए, फिर अपना माउंटबेटन प्लान आया इवेंचुअली, and in this Mountbatten plan there was largely consensus from the side of Congress and from the side of Muslim League. Okay, this can be acceptable, but the reason being British did not come up with the boundaries commission before the partition. आज हो गया ठीक है, बाउंड्री की रिपोर्ट लगा दो, कौन किस तरफ है. तो that Radcliffe report which eventually came up with the boundaries of India and Pakistan, it was announced after the partition. So at the time of partition, nobody knew it was in Pakistan or it is in India. So everybody is responsible. Such a big scale of political activity, there cannot be any one actor. ठीक है, इमोशनल होके ठीक है, आप बीइंग इंडियन आप गाली दे दोगे कि हाँ ठीक है ब्रिटिश और मुस्लिम लीग है, बट सम कैन बी ऑफ कांग्रेस ऑल्सो. देयर इज ऑलवेज अ नैरेटिव दैट कांग्रेस ओवर एम्फेसिस ऑन सेकुलर फॉर्म ऑफ नेशनलिज्म, it eventually also took away the Muslim classes away from their fold. ठीक है, तो उस नेशनलिज्म को किस तरीके से डेवलप करना था, that itself was becoming a difficult part. That's why these Muslim people, they started turning away from Congress at that point of time. But necessarily so, if we see today's India, we have more Muslim population, तो किस level तक इसकी acceptability है, that is in itself in jeopardy. कि हर argument हम बना तो लेते हैं, but कैसे, किस तरीके से. ठीक है, anyway we don't have to go beyond that. This is more than enough discussion on this topic, and इसको एक बार revise कर लेना, ठीक है. Then comes the last question, why Congress accepted the partition? It was the one force which was saying हम कभी नहीं करेंगे, कुछ भी हो जाए. Okay, so see the various factors which were responsible for it. Historical burden, acceptance in Lucknow session of 1916, even the Rajgopalachari formula which talks about कि ठीक है plebiscite कर लेंगे on the issue of partition, but first we should talk about transfer of power. Okay, so those are just the acceptance of partition. Even in the cabinet mission there was grouping. Okay, then eventually at the time of the Mountbatten plan, Mountbatten said I'm going to ensure minimum Pakistan. That was acceptable to the Congress. So loss of minimum territory. Efforts of Muslim League from 1937 onwards, that we have already seen, use of religious issues like Islam is in danger for popularizing their party, that was being there. The support of the British, that Cripps mission, Shimla cabinet, they had given virtual veto to the Muslim League. Then extreme communism, like on 16th August 1946 they came with direct action day. Okay, failure of four other plans which we had seen, and then the ultimatum. These are the pressure tactics which can be seen from the British side. If we are going to leave, तुम्हें कुछ करना है तो कर लो, नहीं तो we'll go away. And then finally the last one, the utopian thought that we are getting partition only for today, maybe after few days we'll come back, all that. This is the opinion of Gandhi ji, that do not accept partition in your hearts. ठीक है, दिल में नहीं accept करना है, even though LOC पे गोली चलेगी, but you don't have to accept this in your heart. Anyway, so there are multiple viewpoints on any specific part. So this can be an independent questions. Okay, 10 marker में कि why do you think that the Congress accepted the partition? Okay, or it could be, do you think that the partition was avoidable or unavoidable? Or it could be कि who should take the responsibility for the partition of India? So we have discussed all these variety of questions. इसको अच्छे से revision कर लो. यहाँ से कोई भी difficult question आएगा तो आप बहुत अच्छा आंसर लिख पाओगे in comparison to other students. Okay, so this is something which you should do dearly. ठीक है, परसों मिलते हैं, day after tomorrow. We'll discuss, we'll start with these various theories like utilitarianism and the acts which are linked to it, Sati Ben, Anglicist, Orientalist controversy. Then one of the form of nationalism, that is subaltern. Within its umbrella, we'll discuss the peasant movements. Okay. After that, we'll go towards some of the aspects of Maratha Empire, opinion on that, and eventually some opinion on the British administration and its governor generals. Next class में finish करेंगे इस handout को. I think the more difficult topics we have taken today itself. The relative. इसको एक बार read करके आना. We'll meet day after tomorrow at the same time, 6 p.m. Okay.